Okay, welcome everybody to this week's episode of the Burn and Vote podcast. It's your host, Thomas Pierce. Today with me, I have a very special guest, DJ Olojo. Did I pronounce your last name correctly, DJ?
Yes, sir.
Sweet. Welcome to the podcast, man. DJ is the managing director of ASO Custom Homes in Atlanta. He's a real estate investor, a licensed builder constructor, and also does consulting in that space. So welcome, DJ, to the pod.
Hey, I appreciate it, Thomas. Thanks so much for the opportunity to chat with you today and introducing me to your audience.
For sure. So I have mostly considered real estate as a way to diversify my investments down the line. Kind of getting out of the rent rat race, if you will, and diversifying out of the stock market, looking at savings and kind of trying to build wealth that way. How did you get into the space? Today you're an expert. What was your path to this moment with real estate?
Awesome. So I started after the kind of 2008, 2009 real estate crash. And so I was a management consultant working for a consulting firm in the metro Atlanta area. And I was on boats, planes, and trains. And that was my job. Made pretty good money and was helping healthcare clients save people by human capital consulting. And some of my buddies who I went to college with said, hey, these Atlanta condos are selling for really, really cheap. Maybe we should pool our money together and see if we can buy one. And you got to remember, I'm maybe a year and a half, 2 years removed from undergrad. And then my buddies are like, starving grad school students.
Yeah.
And we're like, all right, cool. We're like, I got $3,000. You got $2,000. And one of my buddies just started working with IBM. And so he was able to qualify for a loan when all of us couldn't, right? And so long story short, that didn't work out because my buddy's dad said, yeah, I don't think it's a good idea for you to be co-signing and qualifying for your 3 buddies or 4 buddies, right? So fast forward, one of my other buddies who was also in grad school at the time, he had a little bit of money saved and he said, he's going to do it. So he jumped out and he bought his first property, and he called me and my buddies up and was like, hey, look, I'm buying this property. Do you guys want to invest? I'll give you a return on your money. And fast forward, I invested $5,000, my life savings at the time, and he gave me back $6,000. And I was like, if he gave me back $6,000, he probably made a lot more than that. So, I want to loan more. And that's kind of what started the journey, and it kind of just snowballed from there as a part-time, fun, exciting thing to do on the side to a full-time career 8 or so years later after that initial investment.
That's awesome. I was so ready for you to be like that first go at it, and it worked out perfectly, and we still work together, all 4 of us.
Nah, that didn't quite work out. One thing about real estate is that just like most relationships, real estate is cyclical and seasonal. And so, you have partnerships, you have relationships, and as you grow and as you learn more, you still work together, but then you just work in different ways. So. And
did you grow up in a family where real estate was discussed or a familiar topic? How was your comfort level originally?
Yeah, so I was semi-comfortable with real estate. I knew of it as an investment vehicle. My mom is a real estate broker, and my dad became a real estate agent. But they tried investment real estate, but they didn't really like it. I grew up in Detroit, and so they tried buying some investment properties in Detroit and just did not really care for it. And they would help people buy and sell houses, but it wasn't really their full-time job. It was more of a side thing they did. And so they both had good careers, and I was familiar with the asset class and familiar with real estate, but by no means was I an expert.
Gotcha. I ask because I think if it's a different type of investment, a different career, any kind of new challenge, a lot of people, at least I hear this with my people around me a lot, maybe you do too, of like they're uncomfortable trying it because they don't know anything yet, as a thing that holds them back from trying something new. So how did you kind of push through that and try? Because now it's your career, you love it, you're on the other side, if you will. And whether someone's listening and it's personal finances, their relationship with alcohol, a personal relationship with someone else, there's always limiting beliefs. So how did you personally push through those in this, specific context?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you got to remember, everybody talks about real estate nowadays in a very rosy, way, right? Everybody wants to own real estate. Real estate values have increased tremendously over the last, few years. And so you look really smart if you were buying real estate 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. But the time when we started buying real estate, nobody wanted real estate. The real estate crash just happened. We were in a recession. And buying real estate was like the plague. It was like, why are you buying that? You know what I mean? And so ultimately, the reason I was able to push past it is because a couple things. One, I had a good job where I was making decent income. I had a 401k, and the money I was using was additional savings that I was saving, right? And so I wasn't married. I didn't have any real responsibilities besides, my rent payment and my student loan payment and stuff like that. So I figured if this went bad, my worst case scenario is that I lose this pot of money that is just a kind of a rainy day fund. And so by putting myself in a situation where I was okay with the worst case scenario, I was able to do my due diligence and jump into an investment, and it paid off. And that's how each one kind of just multiplied and snowballed into something bigger and bigger and bigger. But I think in any situation, when your audience thinks about how do you do something that you are scared of, right? I think there are two things that help me in those situations, right? One is I evaluate the situation and I say, okay, what is the worst case scenario for this situation? And in that situation, if I can stomach the worst case scenario, I proceed, right? And then the other way I evaluate situations is if I was on my deathbed and I did not do this thing, right? Would I look back and have regrets? And so those two filters allow me to approach my decision-making process with a little bit more clarity. One, because if it's a deathbed type situation, I am like, hey, okay, we're going to do it. We're going to figure out a way to make it happen. And if it's a situation where the worst case scenario is not the worst thing in the world to me, I'm okay risking it. Now I will say my risk tolerance is pretty decent, but that lens and that filter allows me to make good, educated guesstimates.
That's awesome, man. I love that. I do a similar thing with the deathbed, but for things that are upsetting me. Mm-hmm. So let's say something's a pain in the butt right now, and I think about, in my last moments, am I going to care about this problem? And if the answer is no, then I say, fuck it.
It's like, let's go.
That's awesome, dude.
No, that's hilarious.
Sometimes it's like, there are things that like my girlfriend will be like, you should probably care about that more. But
So,
yeah, that's please go ahead.
And I was gonna say the problem that your girlfriend's probably pointing out is probably like, hey, does the house need to be clean? Will I care about that on my deathbed? So
definitely can be used in the wrong way.
Absolutely.
Nice, man. So the other thing that you on your kind of public facing content is around community building, as opposed to, this is my inference also, please, correct me if I'm wrong, but I sensed, there's a community building aspect and not just a profit through real estate aspect. So is that something that you... Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so absolutely, man. So I'm really, really passionate about real estate. And in particular, I'm passionate about individuals owning real estate, right? So there's a couple different areas in which my passion, in which I try to be a strong advocate for. One is first-time home ownership. I think first-time home ownership is so key and so crucial because a home creates a lot of different economic drivers for an individual, right? Not only do they get the tax benefits, not only do they get to call a place home and build community around that place, but there was a study done, I think, around 1990 about people who purchased homes versus those who were renting, and this study was published in the Journal of Economics. I think, again, the study's a little dated because they followed these people for 15 years, right? And what it showed is that people who owned homes had anywhere between $6,000 to $15,000 more net worth per year than those who did not own homes, right? Mm-hmm. And so if you think about that from an economics perspective, that's a game changer as it pertains to someone's personal finances, as it pertains to how quickly they could retire, as it pertains to the type of experiences they can expose their kids to and their family to. And I think that home ownership is so crucial and so key. And so I'm a big fan for first-time home ownership. The other thing that to me goes hand in hand with first-time ownership is affordable housing, and really understanding that, housing in America is becoming unaffordable for many families, right? And so many families are stuck being renters because they can't afford to get their house. No, even though we have, FHA loans, even though we have things like the NACA program, even though we have different government assistance programs. And so I think the affordable housing piece is also very, very key, and something that, we try to advocate for, and something that we try to implement in our own kind of business strategies as we move forward. And then the last piece that goes hand in hand with home ownership and affordable housing is the foreclosure prevention side, right? And so the other thing that we spend a lot of time doing, and one of the things that I personally have done a lot of is really trying to help folks who are going in foreclosure. And when you say, okay, DJ, what do you mean by that? Well, I started buying houses during the downturn on the courthouse steps in Atlanta, Georgia, right? And so you would have to go to the courthouse steps, a house would be auctioned off, and you would bid on that house. And that's how we used to buy property pretty consistently. And that foreclosure sale happens every month in every county across Georgia, right? And it happens in every state across the United States. They have different sheriff sales and things like that. But depending on the individual, right, there's a lot of times when somebody can have a significant amount of equity in their property and they just let it go to sale. And then they lose out on the home, they lose out on the community, and they lose out on equity, right? And so those three different variables for that individual impact their future and their destiny significantly. And so being able to help them understand the best option and the best outcome in their situation, although they're having some financial stress at the moment, is one of the things that we really try to help people with. In my career, I've talked to thousands of people going into foreclosure, and the story's similar across all those people. And it's really about just trying to help them not be a deer in headlights and try to find a way forward. And so those three areas of our business are places in which we try to help. Obviously I do run a for-profit entity, and so we do have to capitalize. But those are the areas in real estate that we are super passionate about. And, I could talk ad nauseum about each and every one of them just because I think that they're really, really important.
That's absolutely amazing. So in the scenario of, let's say you buy a property that's being foreclosed, now you have, or your entity has, the rights to the home. So are you working with the people who lost the house to help them get it back? Or are you, I guess, what is different in this scenario than if someone without your skills and mission had bought the house? Like, it sounds like there's a pathway for these people to get their homes back through your efforts, potentially.
Well, not necessarily a pathway to get the home back, because once it goes to auction, the situation is pretty much finished if they allow it to get there. Our efforts typically start with people before they go to auction. So, up until the time your house is actually foreclosed on, there's typically a lot of different off ramps that somebody can have. They could reinstate their loan. They can get money from friends and family to catch up their mortgage. They can get a modification. They can refinance if their credit is not significantly damaged. There are lots of different ways that they can fix the problem. And worst case scenario, in all honesty, they can file bankruptcy, right? So there are numerous different steps they can take to keep their home if they're informed and if they're really looking for a solution, right? But once the house is sold, typically the only thing that we can do for them is just treat them with respect, right? And that could be, hey, I'm going to give you additional time in the house. That could be, hey, I'm going to give you a cash for keys payment to say, hey, look, I'm going to give you 60 days to move out. I'm also going to give you a lump sum of cash to kind of get you started on your way. And oh, by the way, if the property sold for significantly more than what your mortgage is, I'm going to help you work with the attorneys to get the overage funds that are due to you because you've lived in the house so long, right? And so we do things like that. But I think the best time and the best way to work with those folks who may be in some type of financial distress or going in foreclosure is before the foreclosure. Depending on what state you live in, they're anywhere between 3 and 12 months before the foreclosure sale happens. And so there's typically an amount of time that someone can actually do something to help fix or correct their situation. And that's where we try to help people. And that's where we try to get in front of the foreclosure sale.
So if somebody declares personal bankruptcy, how does that impact the foreclosure process if they're, say, behind on their mortgage?
So, let me just put this out there. I'm not an attorney. I'm not an accountant. I don't play one on TV, right? And so, bankruptcy is a very nuanced topic, right? And so I don't want to make it seem like, I'm an expert on it. However, I have dealt with it both as a lender and as, someone who is, who's helping folks who are in foreclosure. But no matter what, if someone files bankruptcy before their foreclosure, it automatically stops the foreclosure. And so that's pretty much what it does. Now, obviously, there's going to be an impact to their credit. There's other different ramifications. And I think that if anybody's considering bankruptcy, their best bet is to talk with the bankruptcy attorney to really understand how it impacts their situation. But a lot of times when you're dealing with somebody whose credit is already messed up, they obviously are in a tough situation because they're not paying their mortgage. So, they're not taking care of the roof over their head. And they may or may not know kind of where that next income is coming in. I think it's a conversation that, do you really care about your credit at that point? Because,
right.
It's probably the least of your worries, right? And if you can get yourself back on the right path, then that may be the best option for you in that situation. So it's definitely case by case. And I would just always recommend that if somebody's in foreclosure and anywhere down the pipeline, that they do a few things. One is that they do something, right? And when I say something, a lot of people that I've worked with over the years, they stop and they look like a deer in headlights. So they know the foreclosure is coming, but it's like a bad dream, and they go to sleep every night having the same dream, but they think they're going to wake up and it's going to change or it's going to be over, right? And so that's the first thing, is that you have to do something. HUD has numerous resources online with foreclosure counselors and stuff like that you can reach out to for free. Different metros have legal aid. Like, for example, Atlanta has Atlanta Legal Aid. Other states have legal aid that will provide you with guidance and assistance. In addition to that, you have to use Google as your friend, right? And I know everybody's not technically savvy, but I think that there's so much information out there that by just staying and doing nothing, they put themselves in a really, really bad predicament.
It makes total sense because, credit can be rebuilt, but, if someone becomes homeless or houseless and is couch surfing for a while and then ends up living on the street, that seems like such a deeper hole to get out of than rebuilding credit, for example.
That's so true, right? And there's a couple things that people need to realize. I think that everybody has to always do an autopsy on their specific situation to know what happened and the best way to move forward. But if you look at home affordability, right, I think that Realtor.com had some statistics around the affordability of housing. And I think in the last few years, right, the median price for housing is over $300,000 versus if you look about 5 or 10 years prior to that, it was around $200,000. And so just in that short time span, the average house has gone up significantly. And, averages across the United States. So there's a lot of generalities in here. But if you look in your own specific market, we know that houses are more today than they were 10 years ago, right? And so for that homeowner who may be in foreclosure, and you're dealing with a situation and you're asking, well, isn't it better just to get rid of the house? I think the questions you need to ask yourself are, what does my next 10 years look like, right? Do you plan to stay in the same place? Do you plan to have the same job? Do you plan to be in the same city? And can you get a similar property in that city for what you are supposed to be paying in your mortgage or your rent? Because the disconnect that a lot of people have and what they don't see currently is that the mortgage you pay that includes your taxes, your insurance, and your principal and interest is going to be less than what you're going to pay for a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment in most major cities nowadays. And so you have to think about how that impacts you. And if you can't afford a mortgage that's $1,500, how can you afford rent that's $2,000? And so those are all the kind of the tugs and the pulls that we try to help people understand, and in our conversations and working with different folks that we try to help bring to light. By no means are we able to help and save everybody, but those folks who come across our path, we just try to make sure that we give them the best advice possible.
That's amazing, dude. And yeah, like, unless someone comes into some inheritance property or something where they don't have to pay for, everyone has to pay for the roof over their head, and it's 24 times a year. You cut a check,
absolutely,
for that roof over your head. And it's like, do you want to work towards getting nothing back, or pursue a scenario where you get some equity in that property? But just to dial it back to basic terms, so my understanding of equity in a house is how much, let's say there's 100 units to purchase until the property is completely owned, let's say over 100 months. If I pay, 12 months of my mortgage, I essentially have 12% of the home of that equity that I am entitled to. Is that accurate?
I just want to make sure I'm following your math. 100 units, you pay 12 months. That gives you 12%.
Just like, let's say I've paid 12%.
No, I got you. That's easy
Yeah.
numbers. Yeah. So that's true to a certain degree, right? And what I mean that's true to a certain degree is the thinking that you're providing there is linear. The thinking is that the value of that property is fixed. So you buy a property for $100,000. You pay $12,000 off on the property, and now the value of the equity that you have is $12,000 because the value stayed at $100,000, with the $88,000 left being a mortgage or whatever else may be the case, right? Your thinking is correct on a linear perspective, but one thing you have to remember about real estate is that typically, in most times, real estate appreciates, just say on average, 2% per year, right? Depending on what market what market you're in. So just say 2% per year. So in the course of 5 years, that house that was 100,000 is now worth 110, right? And you paid off, just to keep the numbers the same, you paid off $12,000, right? And so now your equity has grown from just $12,000 to $22,000. And so you're getting equity with loan pay down, but then you also are getting equity with appreciation. And so that gap continues to widen as time goes on and on and on and on. And that's the beauty of it. In addition to, for a homeowner, it's the tax benefits, right? And so when you're paying rent and you're doing all those things, that principal and interest you're paying on your mortgage, you can't get a tax write-off for that, right? I mean, you can get a tax write-off for that, but the rent, you can't get a tax write-off for. And so you have all these little things that help exacerbate your wealth building, and your net worth. Going back to that study I cited earlier.
That's awesome. I didn't know that. I didn't know that you could. I obviously never owned a home. It's actually, as I've been educating myself, it's on my, I haven't actually proposed this to my girlfriend yet, but I'm proposing the rolling 12 months, I want to be the last 12 months that we pay rent on a home as opposed to, owning a home, because I've seen this story before, what's going to happen if we don't? Is this going to be more money in an expensive market to someone else's mortgage? So
absolutely, man. And that's the thing is, I think that, people always talk about time in the market, right? And I get this question so often. It's like, well, I'm going to buy a home when the property values go back down, or I'm going to buy a home when the mortgage rates go back down, or I'm going to buy a home once everything around me is perfect, everything's comfortable, or I want to get married first, then I want to buy a home, or, there are all these situations that,
so
people make,
excuses.
right? There are all these different things that people say, well, I can't find the right home, right? I would say that if you plan to be in the same location for the next 5+ years, it's a good time to buy a home. And the reason I give that feedback and the reason I give that statement, the next 5 years, because if you know that you're going to be moving and you don't want to be a landlord, you don't want to rent it out or do anything like that, then it may be better renting, because you don't want to be, dealing with the property manager, or you don't want to be in a situation where, you're in a location for school for a couple years and then you're going to just move on somewhere else, right? So if you don't have a 5-year plus time horizon to stay in the home, it may not be the best time for you to buy a house. But however, if you're going to be somewhere for 5 or more years, right, and the prices of real estate continue at their normal pace of, just say even 1%, your house should be worth 5% more than whatever you pay for it. Plus you have the 5 years of loan pay down. And then you can figure out what you want to do. So that delta, of just say, I don't know, 10% of what the original purchase price is, gives you a lot of leverage that even if you had to sell it in 5 years, you at least break even. And if you live somewhere for 5 years and you break even, well, you can just be happy that you had a backyard where your dog can run around and you had a place to invite your friends over and you did the experience and you got the tax benefits, versus saying I lived in an apartment for, all those years. So, that's my recommendation to all your listeners, and especially you, Thomas. Let this next 12 months be your last 12 months. You find a house, and again, there's so many different programs out there, affordable housing programs that allow people to have low down payments. And the beauty of those programs and the beauty of the current market is because interest rates are where they are right now, and because there's a chasm in the market between what buyers want to pay and what sellers want to receive. There's a great opportunity where sellers are open to different things that they weren't open to 6, 12, 18 months ago, when they were getting multiple offers, cash, and you had all different type of iBuyers and investors trying to buy their property. Sellers right now in this current market are open to creative financing. They're open to homeowner assistance programs. They're open to FHA loans, VA loans. They're open to 45, 60, 90-day closing timelines. Sellers have become much more reasonable in the current market. And I think that it would be unintelligent of me not to inform your listeners that they need to take advantage of the current market, because it won't be like this forever. The rates won't be where they are right now forever. They will change. They will go up and they will go down. And I think that you have to pick and choose your spot to say, hey, maybe I refinance in the future 3, 4, 5, 6 years from now. Or maybe I just ride the wave because, our parents and our grandparents had interest rates in the teens. So, 7 or 8% is not that bad when you're looking at 15 or 16%. So
when in history were they that high? Like the 70s? I know that was a high inflation.
Yeah, I think it was around the 70s. I talked to a lot of older real estate investors, and they always laugh when we complain about these real estate interest rates right now. And they always they were like, my first house, I had an 18% mortgage. And, I look up and, now obviously their houses were cheaper than they are now, but still, at the time, it was expensive to them. And so I think that when people look back in time, the mistake that I always heard people talk about is I've never heard anybody say, I really regret, making that purchase of a home, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years down the line. So
Right. Especially if it's within your means, right? And that's what you were talking about, taking account of, is this, I mean, the things that jump to mind to me are like, if I'm making an assessment, or my income potential, my earning potential, is it stable? Say I'm making a certain amount of money right now. Am I gonna be able to sustain that income, whether it be my current job or a different job, over the life of the mortgage? Okay. Is the house gonna appreciate? Yeah, we know that. I guess, like you were saying, working out the worst case scenarios, because I know there were, like in '08, before you started, there were all these mortgages being sold that were not within the means, from my understanding, were not within the means of the people who signed up for the mortgages, and these loan officers were giving, kind of predatory deals.
absolutely.
So I guess, so yeah, that's a good one. Like, how can someone, what are the basic pieces of information someone needs to look at before they sign on a mortgage, for example, as far as, very high level, like basics, like assessment of, is this a sustainable investment for me? How do I avoid, being someone like in '08 where they were suddenly out of a home?
Absolutely. So I think there's a couple things. So, before the real estate crash that you're referencing, right? Those loans were very predatory. They would allow people to, get into houses knowing that in a few years they wouldn't be able to afford them. And so, our government has put numerous stopgaps in place to deal with that. And if you look at the mortgages originated over the last, 5, 7, 10 years, is much better quality paper. And what I mean by that is that borrowers have strong income, borrowers have good debt to income ratios, and it's just better, stronger buyer profiles. That's the first thing. As it pertains to what someone needs to assess in their own current situation before they buy a home, I think that it's just a basic kind of financial assessment, right? So how much do you make? How much are you currently spending on where you're living and what you're doing? How much can you afford to spend on a home? And, also it's not just the purchase of the home, but it's also the upkeep and everything else, right? And then based on that, I would call up a loan officer and say, okay, hey, loan officer, run my finances, my debt, my income, all that through your scenario, and let me know what you think I can afford and what the payment looks like. And so by doing that, someone will get a really good understanding of how much house they can buy, if they can be competitive in whatever market they're looking at, and you begin to understand what's needed to actually take that step to home ownership. And I think the other thing that people need to do is don't be afraid to say, I don't know. Right. I think that's the thing that stops a lot of people, is that they don't know. They get afraid of telling people they don't know, and they don't get the help they need. There are so many resources out here for first time home buyers. There's so many good podcasts. There's so many educated real estate professionals, so many good realtors out there who will help you understand the process, understand the journey, and help you navigate that home ownership journey successfully. And so I think that you have to be curious about it, and you have to really know that that's a wealth building tool, the same way you are putting money in your 401k and your retirement account. You have to really look at the home ownership piece as another leg in that stool of financial security and wealth building.
Preach. I love it. That's good, man. And I think, people can listen here, right? I'm asking the questions, and hopefully people are getting inspired, like I am, to take it more seriously, right? And I think that, like we were talking about earlier, any big life change or challenge, there's always a good excuse to not start now.
100%.
So, 100%. It's make the assessment and prioritize it, right? Like, it's kind of cheesy, but I don't like to say I don't have time for something. I'll admit what's happening, and I'll say I'm not prioritizing that right now.
Yeah, and that's the case.
It's like, that's what it is. There's no real other way to be like, about it, because either you're prioritizing something and making it happening, or you're not. And that's my assessment. It might be a little, black and white, but
Well, no, I think that's the case, right? I think it's the same thing. You can make that same argument for family. You can make it for working out. You can make it for business.
mhm.
You're doing something with the 24 hours you have in a day, right? Whether it's sleeping, whether it's playing games, whether it's working, you're doing something with that time. And so I think anything that is important to you, you make time for. And so I think to your listeners and to everyone who hears the podcast, I think the big thing is that if home ownership and financial freedom is important to you, I think you got to make time to understand it. And in our society, there are so many different resources available to anybody who's interested in anything. Just go on Google, just go on YouTube. Just open up Apple, and you will see tons of different people talking about whatever you're interested in. And I think that that's the key to learn more, to get inquisitive about it. But I really do think, and deep down in my heart, in particular for low income families, right? Because I think that those people who are either come from wealth or who have, a family that is financially stable, independent, or who are high income earners, the conversation of them buying a home versus not buying a home, to me, is a little bit different. Because if they make a certain amount of money, they will still be able to max out their 401k. They'll be still able to make investments. They're accredited investors. They'll be able to do other things, whether they have real estate or not. The people who I really think need to dive in and really understand are those folks who are on the lower end of the financial spectrum. Those folks who, you have to use a 3% down loan. You need to get government assistance, in order to buy your first house. And I think the reason why it's so important for that group is because as inflation continues to rise and as the years and years pass on, what's going to happen with that group is that they're going to be stuck as renters, and the option to buy won't be available to them in 4 years or 5 years or 10 years, because the price point of a house is going to continue to increase and it's going to be out of reach. And I think that those people are the people who need to take it the most seriously, because as time goes on, it gets more and more difficult to achieve that American dream. And those at the bottom of the financial spectrum are the ones who carry the biggest burden on it.
Absolutely. I mean, wages don't increase at the same pace as inflation.
100%. Yeah.
We know that for sure. So, yeah, I think that's good. Let's revisit that. The economic benefits of home ownership. One, you're building that equity that we talked about. So it's appreciating over time, plus the tax benefit. And also, I would imagine, there's kind of a cumulative benefit of, let's say, a house where everyone, a block where everyone rents versus owns. If people own and the majority of their neighbors own, then there's more mutual investment in the actual environment and taking care of the place, maybe supporting local businesses because my family's rooted here, your family's rooted here, you own that shop, I'm gonna patron the shop. What are the other kind of benefits that come about for the individual and for the community when people are owning as opposed to renting?
Well, I think you hit on a lot of them, right? I think there's a pride of ownership, right? So, if I own my house, I'm not going to let the gutters be full of leaves and have, trash in my driveway.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to make sure my lawn is cut. I'm going to make sure it's pristine, right? So your community looks better. That's number one. Number two is that you actually know your neighbors, right? It's hard to live next to somebody for numerous years and not know their name and not know, the kids' names and not build relationship, right? And so we are relational people. And so knowing, that, my kid Joe goes to school with your kid Sue, it's important, right? They're in the same grade. They ride the same school bus together or they walk to school together. And as time goes on, you build relationships, you build a bond, and you build trust. There's security in that. And so I think that those are the two important things. But the other side of that is that as those houses stay maintained and neighborhoods improve, schools improve, the tax basis increases, and so the municipality gets additional tax income. And as time goes on, the values improve, right? And so the barrier of entry to get into that neighborhood continues to go up as time goes on. And so you get people with higher income potential. You get people moving into the neighborhoods who are helping increase the taxes, which go back to support the schools and go back to support the roads and the community in general. You get parks, you get all those other things that help with the infrastructure. And so I think the biggest thing, though, is that sense of community. All right. Is that you get a place where you are looking out for somebody else and somebody else is looking out for you. And in our transient culture today, where people don't necessarily live in the same neighborhood they grew up, they move all the way across the country. They don't have people who they know and can trust to watch their kids. That's invaluable in today's culture. I just look at my neighborhood, and I can look at my neighborhood and know that if for some reason I couldn't get home to see my kids get on the school bus or get off the school bus, I got 4 or 5 people who I could call and say, hey, would you mind standing and waiting for my kids at the school bus? Right. You know what I mean? Versus if I was renting somewhere, I may not have that same ability. Right. And you don't have to necessarily worry as an owner about your landlord saying, hey, I'm increasing the rent. Right. Your mortgage should be fixed. In addition to that, you don't have to worry about your landlord saying, hey, I'm sorry, I need you to get out, and here's your 60-day notice, right? Go find somewhere else to live. Like, you don't have those same worries or concerns when you own the property. And I think that those are the untalked about benefits of home ownership. It's that community piece.
I know from U.S. history, with the history of redlining in particularly, there was this blocking of black people getting access to those loans and into neighborhoods. What is the current state with that in the U.S.? I mean, because it's talked about kind of in the past, but is that still a barrier in certain parts of the country, or have those things kind of has there been enough of a spotlight on them that it's kind of prevented in the current day?
Yeah, absolutely. So I wouldn't call myself a historian, right? But I'm definitely familiar with redlining and what happened and things like that. Mm-hmm. And I think, does it exist today? I do not think it exists today in that same capacity, right? I think that the federal government has specific mandates that allow for equal opportunity for every American and individual to be able to purchase real estate. That being said, I think the effects and impacts of things like redlining, things like, historical racism and segregation and all those things that have impacted the story of America are still very true today, right? When I look at those folks who are on affordable housing, in the metro Atlanta area, unfortunately, what I see is that, predominantly many of them are people of color, right? And they're typically women of color. And so I think that those things continue to be issues that plague our country. But at the same time, as it pertains to the ability of individuals to get beyond that, to work hard, to find opportunities, to not only build businesses and achieve the American dream. I think that is very, very evident in our current society, in our current culture. And I think the sky is the limit as it pertains to any individual's talent and ability with the resources that are available to them today. Right. So, I can't block out the past and say, oh, this doesn't impact the future. But I think that our future as a country is very bright. And I think that it's up to individuals like me and you to continue the conversation and to help those who may not be in a position to help themselves the best way we can by providing good information, good insight. Because I'm not sure about you, Thomas, but you probably grew up in a home, and you probably grew up in a place where, when you left school every day, you knew where you were coming back to, and it was a safe place, a place you want to be. Maybe you had your own bedroom, maybe you had to share with a sibling, whatever, right? But it was your home, right? Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, today there's so many kids who go to school every day who they have to get free lunch at school. right? They have to get their meals while they're at school, because when they get home, they may not be able to get meals. Or, they come home every day and, maybe the place they're living is roach infested, or, there are all these different things that, the home provides to individuals that we may not think about because we don't have those experiences. And so, I think that it's important for us to just have that conversation and figure out, how do we continue to help advocate for, home ownership and for, the financial kind of independence of those folks who are on the lower income spectrum.
Love it, man. And I love the message of empowerment. I'm of the same mind, and I feel like there's a lot of negativity out there, in a lot of different contexts, just about people's ability to improve their own circumstances. And I try to, with this program, chart the other course and say,
Absolutely.
There's a lot, of course, everyone has their challenges and their setbacks, and our culture is not perfect at all. And lived experiences are different for different groups, but at the same time, like you were saying, there's so many resources and education available. So I think it's awesome what you're doing, man. I guess in that mix, specific to, I guess either Detroit or Atlanta, where you live now, when it comes to neighborhoods turning over and the pros and cons of gentrification, potentially in your work, you work in those neighborhoods too. I know it's a big question, but what do you think those pros and cons are of that phenomenon?
The whole gentrification phenomenon, we can have a whole nother podcast kind of on this topic, right? Right. This is a hot button issue and things like that. But I look at it both ways. And it's hard because I can't give you a straight answer, because I understand both sides of the coin. I understand the people who say, hey, I've been in this neighborhood for X amount of years. I've built community here. I've helped, raise kids on this street. I've helped improve this neighborhood. And now, because my property value, because, you want to go build something new in my neighborhood, whether it's a mixed use development, whether it's, knocking down old houses and building all these expensive houses that we can't afford, that, I should change, or I should leave, or I should move. I understand how folks on that side feel. But what I also have seen in Atlanta, and then also in the city that I grew up in Detroit, is I've also seen how that resurgence and that gentrification can change blighted neighborhoods that are places that you would not want to drive down the street during the day, to places where you have people feel comfortable to run in the middle of the night, right? And exercise in the middle of the night. And so it's a situation that, it's almost a case by case, city by city, locale by locale type of conversation. But I think that investors in real estate will always find ways to make money. And I think that our economic, our economy and the American dream and the way we incentivize people in this country is by improving their financial situation and creating income. And I think that people need to understand that that's what's going to drive everything, right? And although you have people coming in gentrifying these neighborhoods, you also have your tax bases that's increasing, right? And so your city, your municipality, your schools are getting significant amounts of money, that helps them with the infrastructure, that helps them pay down debt, that helps them issue bonds, that helps them do things that improve the overall community. But the other side of it too is like, hey, this is my home, right? And so I think that there are pros and cons on both sides, and I think that it's important to look at every issue from both sides of the aisle, knowing that in some of these neighborhoods, it's important for us to realize and not over dramatize, what's going on there, right? I know personally there are places in Atlanta that when I first started in real estate, I did not feel comfortable going.
Mm-hmm.
and I would not ask my wife or my kids to go there. But now today, some of those same locations, they can go for a walk in the park, and I would not worry or be afraid. And so those things are important because the people who live in those communities must also feel the same way. And so I'm not giving you a really good answer on that, but at the same time, it's a multifaceted topic that they're good points on both sides. But I think that what it comes down to a city having a plan for its communities and its people, and the city and the community working together to implement a plan that allows for more robust housing and better infrastructure, and the residents in the city and community understanding that as time goes on, things will change in every city, and if you don't change, you get left behind.
Yeah, I well said. It's one of those situations that I think just decrying it isn't that useful because it's not going to stop.
Yeah.
There's no legal way to stop people from buying property that I'm aware of. So it's, like you were saying, it's, location specific. And then also probably, if someone is moving into a neighborhood that they wouldn't have been in, 20, 30 years ago, is have that awareness, and make an effort to actually connect with your neighbors and hear them out, perhaps, or just, I think it's the entitlement thing of like, oh, well, I bought a home here, so I don't have to do anything else. Maybe it's having a little bit more of a generous attitude of, okay, like, I'm moving in here, this neighborhood is changing, I could at least do my part to try to be nice to everybody and actually build that community like we were talking about. And a lot of that comes down to basic social skills, and that's why people should listen to the Bro Nuvo podcast.
Absolutely, man, 100%. 100%. It'll help you raise your game.
For sure. So DJ, before we wrap up, just on the personal side of the house, man, what do you do when you're not talking shop about real estate and helping people, get invested in real estate in your downtime?
So I got a wife and I got two girls, and so I'm a girl dad, and so I'm typically doing something with them. Maybe it's, whether it's gymnastics or swimming or something like that. I'm typically sitting in the stands, rooting them on, or taking them to practice or something like that. And then when I'm not doing those things, I love. I'm kind of a foodie, and a little bit of a wino. So me and my wife try to travel, and we try to go eat at overpriced restaurants, that are really good and have a good time. And so that's kind of my passions outside of real estate.
That's awesome, man. Well, this has been phenomenal. Everything from your preparation, your oration, and your bow tie are fantastic.
Man.
So thank you, man. Thank you so much.
Man. So, hey, thank you so much, Thomas, again, for the opportunity to connect with you today and to speak to your audience. If I can ever do anything for you or anybody who's listening to the podcast, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or, at DJ at ASO, like Apple Sam Orange Holdings, HOLDINGS.com. So, again, thank you so much. And, this is the Bowtie Builder sounding out.
Drop the mic. I love it.